right, so this is broadcasting live now. So we're going to go down a couple of different items. And first off, why don't you tell me, guys, we'll start with you, George, and then, no worries. Matt, why don't you start by telling us who you are and what you do and what your real stance is in all this madness?
Well, it's certainly a tsunami coming at us here, that's for sure. My name is Matt Cumin. I am a civil rights attorney in San Francisco. I'm the co-founder.
There I am.
You there, George?
Hang on.
1 second.
Yes, I'm here now.
Okay,
Okay, we got you turned around again.
did you see it on yours?
No, on Facebook, Google?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay, I'm turned around. Am I going to be anywhere close to on screen now? I can't tell. Gosha?
Tilt it up a bit.
You are there. Nothing just. Let me do it.
Tilt it up a little more, George.
Okay.
A little higher. That's good. That's perfect. That's great.
Here. There you go.
That's good.
You have to do it so that you fall over forward, too.
Mm-hmm.
There's something underneath that.
You lost your sound now.
Oh boy.
There. Okay. We'll get you.
Just make it solid so it doesn't go anywhere.
Okay.
Sure it doesn't go that way. Okay. You sure? Yeah, it'll flip. There's no way it'll.
No, I'm going that way. There's
Something underneath there.
Okay. You good, George?
I think so.
Yeah, you look good. Okay.
Tell.
Matt, once again from the top. Go for it.
All right. My name is Matt Cumin. I'm a civil rights attorney in San Francisco, California, and I am the co-founder and co-director of a political action committee and a think tank called California Cannabis Voice, and we've been working on tactics and strategies to promote legalization and fight the war on drugs and the war on cannabis. And I've been working in this sector for about 20 years now.
Oh, thank you. All right, George, your turn.
Hello, everybody. I'm George Mull. I'm a cannabis lawyer and activist, most of the time in Sacramento, California, but also in San Francisco. And I had an organization before called California Cannabis Association. I am very interested in policy in California. I did craft an initiative after trying to work with the Parker folks. And I'd love to talk to you guys today about what I see as the deficiencies and maybe discuss whether or not the Parker initiative is good enough for California.
All right, cool. And my name is Ryan Munevar. I'm basically the executive director of Monterey County NORML. And I'm just going to moderate this thing, and we're going to go down the list of a couple of major items. So right at the top, I'm just going to throw this out there. I know it's kind of a wild card, but honestly, the distribution model is what has a lot of people very angry right now. And I'm going to say it. There's a big reason why. If roughly 80% of the cannabis grown in California is being shipped out of state into the black market, the reason for that is you make a lot of money doing that, straight up. It's not much money to actually sell in areas that are legal. All right, it's safer, but there's a risk-reward ratio that people play, and a lot of people that have already been embedded in this industry for a long time, they don't want to change their model. Now, people coming into it at a new angle, they would love to actually get in where there's seed-to-sale, tracking, transparency, a lot of other things, because it makes them feel safer. So that one's out there, and the distribution model is playing havoc with a lot of people's minds on how this is all working. So let's start actually at the beginning, though. Let's begin with cultivation. We're going to just kind of ping-pong this back and forth. George, in your draft, in your initiative, how do you deal with cultivation for things that are being grown outdoor, indoor, mixed? Do you have anything unique to say about that first?
Well, first of all, you'll notice that mine is quite a bit shorter, and one of the reasons for that is I don't think it's a good idea to be all that specific in an initiative. An initiative, if it's well written, should last the next 3 or 4 decades and should have enough flexibility to allow whatever the licensing bodies are that are selected, to come up with regulations that can change as the industry expands and matures. So we do not necessarily lay out what the particular license should be for indoor, outdoor, or mixed light, whereas AUMA has taken the tack of pretty much aping exactly what's in MRSA.
And Matthew, how does your, well, the AUMA initiative, not necessarily your initiative by no means, but it's simply speaking off of like going through it, how does AUMA actually handle cultivation for outdoor, indoor, mixed light?
Well, you know, George, you know, I got to back up for a second here and be very, very clear. You know, Ryan, you asked me to, or you and Jackie asked me to, quote unquote, be the proponent for or present the AUMA. I'm happy to present the AUMA, and at some point, if it's the only initiative that's on the ballot in November, I will vote for it, and I will encourage people to vote for it. That said, if I see a better initiative that can get on the ballot and where the proponents and can come up with $1.5 million minimum just to get the signatures ready, signatures to get it on the ballot, I'm going to look carefully at all these initiatives. But at this point, and George probably agrees with me, it doesn't look like anything's going to make it to the ballot except for the AUMA, because it has the backing of significant groups with significant resources. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'm not, you know, I've been asked to defend something that I would not have written or put forward myself, although I understand pragmatically why the proponents of the AUMA wrote it the way they did, because frankly they're trying to appeal to an audience that is not us. It's not you, and it's not me, and it's not George. It's the regular voters, primarily in Southern California and inland and populated urban areas in the state, that are going to go to the vote polls. They may or may not use cannabis themselves. They may know people who do. It is not their life. They don't wake up in the morning thinking about cannabis. They don't go to work thinking about cannabis, and they don't go to sleep thinking about cannabis. They're just voters who are being asked to make a policy decision. So I understand why this was done this way. So now, getting to your question, what the drafters did was they took the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, which Jerry Brown signed on October 9, 2015, and they incorporated the license types, essentially incorporated the license types into this law. So you have what was about 11 license types for cultivation, George. Is that about right?
Well, yeah, each one of the 3 license types had 3 subtypes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they basically indoor, outdoor, mixed light, they call it. They have different sizes, and then what I like about the MMRSA, what I like about AUMA, what I like about a lot of what's happened, which my group and work that we did had a lot of influence in helping to create, was we got everyone to finally say that this thing is agriculture. This is an agricultural crop. This is really important for the future, and getting that was a big victory for us. So that's what the license types are in the AUMA. And Ryan, you're absolutely correct that if you're new to the industry and coming in, you don't have a problem with any of this. But if you've been in the industry, slogging away, risking felonies and risking your life to keep the cannabis movement and cannabis production alive for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, something like the AUMA or the MMRSA doesn't really look all that great necessarily for you. So it's like my favorite cartoon. It's a picture of a little fish being eaten by a bigger fish being eaten by the biggest fish, and the little fish says there is no justice, and the middle fish says there is some justice, and the big fish says the world is just. And basically, it really depends on where you sit and where you're looking at it from, as to how it affects your self-interest. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that broad philosophical perspective on all this.
Excellent answer. George, you jump in on that.
I would agree with most of what Matt says, but I think perhaps, Matt, it would behoove us to maybe frame this discussion today, because I wouldn't call it a debate. I'm not saying that you need to defend every part of AUMA, but I think the discussion that both of us are getting to is that we see things that you or I would have written differently, and we see policies that we do not agree with. And I think we should objectively go over what all those differences are. The big question then, and I struggle with this as well, as I know you do, is whether, given the deficiencies in AUMA, is it good enough that I would vote for it, or is it bad enough that I would not? And those are individual choices that I think each of the listeners will have to make after looking at what the actual wording of this 62-page document is. And I think that you and I objectively can go through and probably agree as to some of these deficiencies, although we may disagree about whether or not that's a deal killer in our own minds.
No, that's a great way to proceed. I was talking yesterday to someone about this issue, and I remember when I was 20 years old, and I thought of myself as a revolutionary, and I thought, I want everything now. And now that I have the gray hair to match yours, George, I think of myself as an incrementalist. That I guess that the aging process has taken some of, has beaten me up. Being a revolutionary in my own mind, however self-aggrandizing that was, but going to Mississippi, organizing people and labor unions and all the work I did and all the things, and suing the city of LA and all the stuff I've tried to do. But fundamentally, the population is slowly coming around to the idea that it's okay to possess some cannabis, and that's been a huge, huge moment. And from the latest polling, 60% of Californians look like they'll say yes to whatever we can get on the ballot. That seems to be what's going on.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I had disagreements with the drafters of AUMA. They were very gracious and included me in a very big way in the last 2 weeks. And they did make about 40 changes that we had asked for, but the fundamental changes weren't made. And I guess that's the difference, is how far are we willing to go to supposedly cater to the soccer moms, to the folks that don't really know much about cannabis, rather than educate them and move the needle a little bit, or be hopeful that, as we've all seen, that each year more and more people are comfortable with and in favor of the legalization of cannabis. So I just think that they drew the line in a way that was more conservative than is necessary, that bends over a little too much for what I see as law enforcement and League of California Cities' interests, and I would have drawn the line differently.
Sure.
So I think that's about it.
I think that's, it's an imprecise art, drafting and focus groups and so forth. And when I first saw the AUMA, I got yelled at when I was moderating at the Emerald Cup. Remember, I
refuse to change my wording from Parker Initiative, but.
It's a political statement to call it the Parker Initiative, right? It's a philosophical and political statement to identify it with someone who has a lot of money, who wants to see a policy decision made in California move on, which I actually do too. I'm tired of the legalization debate. I'm done with it. I want to move on to some other things. And I actually will say that I believe that this AUMA will enable us to do that. When I first saw this statute, the thing that really knocked me off my chair, and I was quoted in some newspaper article, talking about the fact that an ounce of marijuana, which, we finally have legalization, meaning you will not be arrested, you will not be breaking law if you possess marijuana. So then the question always is, well, how much? Well, in the AUMA, you can have an ounce and you can grow a few plants at home. When I saw that, I thought to myself, well, Jesus, I can have a bottle of vodka in my liquor cabinet. I can have a wine collection with tens of thousands of bottles. I can have booze up the wazoo, which we all know is, much worse for us, or it's worse for us. It's bad for us. We're, cannabis, and I'm thinking to myself, this is unbelievable. But then, I was really glad that you worked with the folks doing the drafting. And I actually had some conversations with them as well, because we've been doing this a long time, you and I, and they care about what we say, and we're moderate voices, George and I, fundamentally in this debate, in the sense that we recognize that there's going to be regulation. We may not like it, but we recognize there's going to be regulation, and we're willing to work with that. And what happened was, I looked at this, and I talked to one of the drafters, and I was comfortable with the idea that the language of AUMA allows for us to lobby the legislature to move the ball further along. And I guess there was a moment for me when I was like, that's the way it's going to be. If I'm going to have to continue to schlep on down to Sacramento and organize the grassroots, then so be it. And get those limits moved, and so forth. And so I bit down hard on my tongue, and I said, yeah, I'll go along, because that provision is in there. Now, that provision that basically requires us to continue to work on education and work on lobbying, in a way, from my group's perspective and my own personal philosophical perspective on how political and social change works, is in some ways a silver lining on an otherwise dark and stormy cloud. Because what this will enable me to do is to go into communities and be able to continue to talk about issues that need to be talked about, that will also lead to a practical phone call to a legislator saying, I think that 1 ounce limit, or whatever the changes that we want to make, because we're allowed to make, the legislature will be allowed to make changes in this statute, which I like that, I like that. And it's in fact what we did up in Humboldt too, George, we gave the Board of Supervisors, we really worked with the board, our elected officials up there, to come up with a living, breathing law. And I think that despite the deficiencies of it, which I have no doubt, it's silly to have a 1 ounce limit. It's not rational, it's not science, it's not good policy, but it was a rough-hewn political compromise. And if that's the one they wanted to make, then it's going to give us an opportunity to keep organizing and have real grassroots organizing with real grassroots power potential. So that's
one of the things when we talk about specifics that I tried to get changed, and you'll see it in the provisions in my act, were pretty well thought out. But one of the things was, instead of a 1 ounce limitation, which I went along with in my first draft, and liberalized it to, I think, 4 ounces in the update that was filed in December. But specifically, it's talking about a limit while a person is in a public place or on a public highway, because I did not want to continue having a misdemeanor, or in some cases a felony, for having more than 1 ounce in one's own home. Because then, like one example, in AUMA, if a person is to grow at home, at first they said you could only still have like 1 ounce, and they changed that when I pointed out that that was kind of dumb, and they put the provision in there that you could have more than 1 ounce as long as not more than 1 ounce was outside of a locked, like a safe. So now, if a kid came over and saw that there were 3 or 4 ounces and told his mom, she could tell the cops, and they would have a reason to get a warrant and invade your home based on the fact that you had violated AUMA. I'm so sorry, we're having technical difficulty here. The thing is, I just would really like to see, as a step in any initiative, that we stop having the ability to do searches. and kick people's doors in, shoot their dogs, all the horrible things that have happened from that. So that's one of the worries. There's probably 5 or 6 other instances of that we can talk about in that AUMA, that because we don't really repeal a single criminal statute, there still are reasons for people to be arrested left and right. And if I can, I don't mean to jump off topic too much, but I'd like to get the viewers to understand.
No, George, the one thing that you raised the sort of a little fear mongering there. What we see in Colorado and other states really belies what you're saying might happen here. I mean, once the cops get the message that this thing is legalized, it does appear in other states to send us a message that, you know what, guys, give it up. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's right to have all those criminal penalties still in the books. I mean, Omar Figueroa and a bunch of other lawyers drafted something back in 2012 that I really loved. It was a one-page, repeal all the criminal laws, and the legislature has 6 months to come up with a workable scheme to regulate cannabis. I really like that, I thought it was simple, easy, and it puts the onus back on our lawmakers who we pay a lot of money to go do some work, go do some work, guys. And so I don't think the evidence, George, and I'm an evidence-based guy, I don't think the evidence supports your fear that we're going to see a continuing level of arrest that we've seen in the state.
I hope not, and I hope it's not an opportunity to discriminatorily apply the thing. It's like, remember back when I was at UCLA many decades ago, at the time Beverly Hills had a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit for everywhere, even on Sunset Boulevard, and it was used discriminatorily against certain people that they didn't think should be driving across Beverly Hills. I'm just concerned, that we want to fix things with the impact of the war on drug in the inner cities, and if there's still an opportunity to get a warrant and go into someone's place on the idea that you might catch them for something else in addition, that's still a worry. And to be honest with you, nothing really truly changes as far as criminality one way or the other, except for right now in California, if you don't have a medical marijuana recommendation and you're arrested or found to have an ounce or less, it's a $100 infraction. Now, AUMA gets rid of that and makes it anyone over 21 that has an ounce or less has no infraction at all. But it still maintains all the other criminal penalties. It's reduced some of them, and they told me that I should be happy that it was reduced from 3, 5, and 7 years for certain offenses down to 2, 3, and 4 years, and they thought that was enough of a change. I personally don't think it is. So I think everybody can have different opinions as to whether or not that's an incremental move that's enough for the state of California. I just don't think it's far enough.
George, and it's hard to argue, but I think ultimately what I'm hoping to we'll see happen is we'll now be able to create some baselines, and we'll be able to see and measure things a little bit more clearly. So we'll have a clear line. Here's how much you're allowed to have, and let's see if the arrests or the search warrants are going to be used the way Michelle Alexander eloquently puts in her book, the new Jim Crow, in a way that discriminates against minorities, poor minorities, people of color, people who have been absolutely disproportionately subjected to law enforcement activity for a wide variety of things, not just drugs.
And they still might, though. That's the problem. And I think, and we have differing opinions about this, but when something like having more than 1 ounce in one's possession is a misdemeanor, for many people, all of us, but I think even more so in the inner cities, could result in the violation of their probation conditions and send them back to jail just for something as small as that. And I'd like that not to happen anymore.
George, I do criminal defense work too, and I've sued the police for violating civil rights. Most of my clients over the years have been minorities, so I get that. But at the same time, it's a cultural signal shift, and it's a political signal shift. It's finally at the top of the mountain. We're no longer going to philosophically find a problem with someone having some marijuana in their possession. And at some point, maybe I'm a little conservative, but if everyone understands that they're not supposed to leave their house with more than an ounce of cannabis, you know, it's like I stop at red lights. You know, I mean, I try to follow the laws. And now you're going to be able to have some pot at home. You're going to be able to drive around with some pot. You're going to be able to buy some pot in the store. That's, and here I am. This is about the most rah-rah statement you're going to get out of me today, but that's a pretty good thing. After what you and I have lived through, George, and both of us are around the same age, this is a pretty monumental shift. And if Californians vote 60% for this, just imagine what that's going to do, how quickly that's going to accelerate both other states legalizing, and then once we get that some magic number, I don't know what it is, of states legalizing, finally we can get the federal government to move the needle on getting it off Schedule 1, which ultimately is my goal. Is I want to, and I see legalization as a process. I don't see legalization as a revolution. That's what I was saying before. It's a process. It's an incremental thing. I don't disagree with you. I hate all this crime. I mean, going to jail for marijuana. I mean, really? Arrested for marijuana? Really? When I can, I mean, it's stupid. It's silly. And yet, here we are, in our lives, trying to make a political compromise so we can get, Sally, Hillary housekeeper down in Southern California who doesn't really want her kids smoking pot, thinks it's bad, but basically is going to be convinced by policy arguments that it's probably better to legalize it this way than not. She's the vote we need, and I don't know how to, if you had a good, strong organization that had money and was doing educational work, I mean, down in Southern California, and you were out there, talking in these communities to these pastors and these huge, this huge amount of churches and religious communities and a lot of poor communities, and they're telling their people, marijuana is the end of Western civilization. So I mean, like in 2010, Prop 19, I think over 75% of black women over 50 opposed legalization. I mean, they don't. A lot of the minority communities, ironically, in the older groups, they don't want it. So, unless, and I'm not even talking about the white Orange County resident or the Riverside or San Bernardino. I mean, people have to understand we have 39 million people in the state of California. Well over 60% of them live in the LA basin and below down to San Diego. I mean, that's who we got.
One of the concerns also is, with the MRSA passing, it sort of changes the landscape as well, and it confuses things a little bit, because what we do have with this initiative is we are, in order to not have that $100 fine anymore, giving away, I believe, some other rights, because we're locking in some of the MRSA things that could be subject to challenge. And the thing I believe that's a little different about California than most states that are facing a legalization issue is that practically, because of the language in Prop 215 that allows a recommendation really for any condition that a doctor could think could be benefited by cannabis, it's not as big of a jump to legalization as it is in many states where you have to show that you've got a pretty serious illness. So in my mind, not trying to be flippant and not, in any way insulting anybody, but really anybody with a pulse right now that's of any age in California can get a recommendation, and usually it's $45 or so with a coupon in the back of some nice, free rag. So it's not that big of a jump for me, and I'm not sure it's worth it for me to get rid of that $100 infraction and then lock in some provisions that I think are really serious. MRSA has made it more difficult for you and I as lawyers. In the past, if someone had a grow, there was at least a chance of showing that it was a collective grow for medical marijuana use, even if it didn't have some sort of a license. Now, if the license isn't issued under MRSA and then later under AUMA, that person is potentially going to jail for years. So,
well, of course, the growers have been facing that for decades anyway, right?
They sure have, but at least you had some wiggle room. Not what they were doing on a lot of the stuff with medical marijuana, and you had a chance especially under 11362.775, is showing that it was a collective.
Which only has been in effect since 2004, January 1, so we've only had that 12 out of the last 45 years of cannabis cultivation in the state. And I'm not saying, listen, I'm a big cooperative defense lawyer. I mean, I love that. I hear you, but I mean, the truth is, I was talking to someone today about, we were looking at the end of Prohibition, 1933, and in California, the voters didn't vote for the ABC and state regulation until the 1950s. And
that's not really true. I mean, basically, the switch to the ABC in the 1950s was subsequent to an immediate switch after the end of Prohibition to the Board of Equalization. So that was just a name change.
Well, they did a huge constitution.
We had statewide legalization of hooch after the 1930s. But what we also had, and I think this is a nice time to bring this up, is with the repeal of Prohibition, it was clearly stated in the Constitution that it was a matter of statewide concern.
Yeah,
and that's why we don't have dry counties like Texas. And
you know how I feel about that, George. I totally agree with you about this. I fought that. When we fought 1262, which was in the legislature in 2014, I went screaming around that, and we did kill it. And then finally we brought it up again, and of course by this time in 2015 we got George Runner and Fiona Ma, the left, the Republican and the Democrat, to go advocate for, and they did. The right-wing Republicans beat up the law enforcement community to say you need to support regulation. And I hated the fact that they're now going to have balkanized, local, control. That makes me insane, And I fought that battle, and all my allies said, Matt, you can't fight that. The League of Cities is too powerful. All the legislature in California is made up of former board of supervisors and city councilors, and they all like local control, and they're not going to give it up. And we lost that, and it was.
We lost it.
One thing, I got to ask this question for the sake of the audience.
Sure.
This was taken out of AUMA, and this is a brief summary of what it was actually taken out of the normal newsletter. The cultivation, adults could cultivate up to 6 plants and possess the marijuana from these plants at the residence for personal use. No more than 6 plants per residence. This differs from the new limit of medical users under MRSA, which allows 100 square feet of growing space per patient. All plants harvested marijuana in excess of 1 ounce must be kept within the person's private residence or in its grounds, in a locked space not visible from public place. And then there's the last part that's real important. Cities and counties may regulate and prohibit cultivation outdoors, but cannot completely prohibit cultivation inside a private residence or accessory structure that is fully enclosed and secure. So here's the thing. If you're able to grow, according to MRSA, with basically 100 square feet, but this is saying you can only grow up to 6 plants, how do we actually handle personal cultivation if AUMA goes through? Which one overrides what? Can we do the 100 square feet that we get from the state, or are we falling back on this 6 plant thing and we're trying to define the difference between recreational and medical? It's very confusing for our members right now.
If I could tackle that for a minute, it is confusing in terms of how it was drafted. One of the changes in MRSA is that for many things, including for tax breaks, you have to now get a state-issued card. It has some strange throwaway language that says without a state-issued card, you still have rights under Compassionate Use Act. But it's iffy. And then when you look at the language in the Parker Initiative, it talks also about a state-issued card. And it also throws away language that you don't necessarily need it not to go to jail. But when it's talking about the limits, what I believe is going to happen is that you can probably take advantage of the 100 square feet limitation under MRSA if you have a state-issued card. If not, you're going to be subject to the 6 plants. That's how I would read it. So you could comply with both.
I agree with George. That's how it's going to go. Remember, you got one is
very nervous, about the state-issued card. I mean, they've had that around since SB 420, and less than 1,000 people, I think, in any one year have ever signed up for it.
Remember what we're going to have now. We're going to have a voter initiative from 1996 that's going to be in full force and effect. They can't repeal that. They can't get rid of that. If they do, they're going to be challenged in court.
we have certain provisions of this AUMA that contradict Prop 215 or add to it in a way that the Kelly decision would have said is improper if the legislature had done it. My take on it is this is a subsequent act of the voters that can and does override the earlier Prop 215.
But you still have Prop 215 in some respects, and you have the state legislature that went off and did its own scheme and its own framework. So we're going to be operating under three different two-voter initiatives and a state legislative scheme.
Yeah, here's the provision though that I concern myself with here a little bit, Matt, is the Kelly decision basically said that the limitations of 6 and 12 plants in Prop 215 couldn't be used as the maximum amount. Instead, that the courts should defer to the decision of the recommending physician. When they knock it down to 100 square feet, that probably would be subject to the same challenge that resulted in the Kelly decision overturning 420 limits. The problem here is when it's then in the subsequent act of the voters, it's codified in such a way that we no longer have an avenue in the courts to overturn it because the subsequent act of the voters has done something to alter 215.
Can we get real for a second though?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, guys. We're about to legalize marijuana in the state of California for any use. Okay, so if you're a medical patient, you're going to have a dizzying array of choices across the state, and hopefully you'll be in a county or city or near a county or city that has those choices. That is what I don't like, is that you're not going to have the access if a county or city bans it. But putting that horrible thing aside for a second, there's going to be marijuana all over the place of all different kinds, all different labels. You can get it to sleep at night. You can get it to party with your friends on a Friday night. You're going to have so many choices, and there's going to be a wide array of product. I know because so many of my clients are developing them now. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, on the back of me in a shelf, we can't quite see it in the middle shelf, but they keep coming over to my office to show me the products, and I'm just blown away by the vast array of products, the labeling, the strain-specific, the labeling, the CBD, THC labeling. I think, George, that you doth protest too much.
Here's the thing: is I think, in a way, it's what you said earlier, and I do think there's a little bit of a difference being in the Bay Area and not necessarily being face-to-face with many of these bans as we see in the Central Valley. But we see most of these jurisdictions that have faced the issue are banning across the board, even when we trot out medical folk that have true needs. And I think it would be kind of ridiculous to think that those same counties would not be twice as likely to ban what they call adult use or recreational. So I do think we're going to have a balkanized state.
But we lost the battle under MMRSA. We lost it there.
So the problem is, let me ask you this. In the first draft that the Parker Initiative filed on November 2, they basically required for a ban to take place that it be put in a ballot measure in front of the voters.
I love that. I thought it was a great.
Subsequent, later filing on December 8th, that's permanent now, that's getting signatures, it took that requirement away. And so now a city council or a board of supervisors can just by an ordinance ban basically everything except for the little bit of indoor cultivation that's allowed. And I think they will, at least for quite some period of time. And
I agree.
And I don't like that. I mean, that's personal. And so it all comes down to, I don't like that. There's other things I don't like. My personal take is I'm just barely at the 50-50 mark, and I think you're probably not a hell of a lot further along from me of saying, okay, suck it up, we'll vote for this thing. Because, I mean, I had a talk with Rob Campia right when we first were, after the filing of the first one, and he hadn't really even read the whole thing. But MPP's position was if California didn't pass something, the next 10 states probably wouldn't have the same momentum and might not pass them. My initial reaction as a Californian was, well, I don't really care because all I care about is California. I don't want to be used as a pawn or just as a mechanism for getting other states to be able to liberalize their laws. But I do understand what these national organizations are doing. I do understand how important California is. I'm just really, really disappointed that we couldn't do a better job in California, that we thought we had to be this timid to, suck up to law enforcement, the league, what we think are conservative voters. I think they are aiming a little low. Does that mean that I'm going to necessarily want to kill this thing? There's parts of me that would love to, and I'm not quite there yet. I wish we could make these changes. I wish we could just hold off and wait till 2018, but it's not a clear idea on my part. I think it's a wobbler.
And you know how horrified I was when they changed that provision to remove the voter vote. I mean, when I saw that, I said, "Thank God! Finally a compromise language." And DPA had worked on that, and I was really pleased about it. And when I saw that last change, I just rolled my eyes, and I was so upset about it. But I also agree with Rob. I'm a Californian, although originally from back east, and I'm thinking about people across the country. I'm thinking about people in the world. I mean, look at Uruguay, Chile, in Europe now. I mean, there's this movement, George, that's taking place across the world, and it's not just about cannabis. It's about reversing really bad policies that led to very unjust arrests, unjust imprisonment, and the diversion of billions and billions of dollars of public funds to something that was a complete and utter policy failure.
Absolutely. I'm hopeful, Matt. I mean, please, from your mouth to God's ears, that with these changes, even with keeping all of these penalties in there and felonies and things that allow a cop to send you away for years on a second offense for any of these violations, that's not going to happen anymore, and things are going to change. But we do have changes in Uruguay and Portugal. We do have 2 months from now an amazing opportunity with the UNGAS, which I think is a bad name for it, but the United Nations General Assembly Special Session on Drugs.
Huge.
The first time in 22 years that the last UNGAS was how to make things zero tolerance and get tough. This one they're saying, hey, we should revisit these policies which seem to have caused way more harm than the drugs themselves, and look more toward harm reduction and some of the choices that are different than the U.S. Approach. But that's what worries me. I would always hope as a Californian that we'd be on the cutting edge, pushing things further along and not being as timid as this. You would think that in 62 pages they could have repealed a single criminal statute. They could have taken it off Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act in California. I think those are moves that are weak. And yes, there's been polling done. Yes, there's concerns about being able to reach out to the voters that are not so knowledgeable of or frightened of marijuana,
or even care about this issue. They don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the voters are sick of it. They just want to get it done. They want to start collecting the tax revenue, and let's move on to some other things. There's a lot.
I agree with you. I just think that we could have done that with a different statute than this and still gotten it passed. I think their choices were way too conservative.
Like I said, I as a policymaker and someone who's all about evidence and clinically based, results, it was pretty clear to me that this was done for political expediency in order to get those votes. And it sounds like, from what I'm gathering, looks like they did it. Looks like they got 60% of the electorate, and I don't think that number's going to go down. I think that number's going to go up. Actually, I think that.
I hope so. We've seen that number creeping up significantly every year.
That's right, and that's the conventional wisdom is that when a new ballot initiative is put out there for the voters, it starts out with a high level support and goes down. But the difference here is you've seen a steady, multi-decade, continuing increase in voter support for legalization. And I don't think the fact that there's going to be an initiative campaign is going to do much for it. I mean, what are the cops going to say? What are they going to say? That Western civilization is going to go down. Everybody in California is not that naive. They know there's cannabis all over the state. and we are what, the 7th or 8th most strongest, biggest economy in the world. You know, everybody in California knows that we're an amazing state with amazing, you know, intellectual resources, universities, jobs. We're an economic powerhouse in our own right.
But
Kansas doesn't.
here's the reality that I'd like to explore a little bit with you, Matt. I mean, I'm not sure what the numbers are exactly, but many people throw around that we have at least 50,000 growers out there. And, you know, well, AUMA and MRSA, neither of them say how many licenses are going to get issued for cultivation. I doubt it's going to be a large percentage of that 50,000. And the question is, are those people going to continue growing? If they do, and they get caught one time, they go to jail for 6 months. If they get caught the second time, they go to jail for up to 4 years. And there are a lot of jackass cops out there, and followed up by prosecutors that don't think the way you and I think.
Well,
And that, in many cases, in El Dorado County and Butte County, is going to continue having people get arrested and go to jail for cultivating.
you know, the other statistic I was going to tell you is when Prohibition ended, you know, 10 years later, there was an estimate that 50% of all alcohol in the country was black market alcohol. I do want to make one point about the licensing, and I've had interesting conversations lately, George, because we're doing a lot of work now in Southern California in low-income and minority communities, and those folks are super excited because they think they may finally get a chance in a new industry where, despite their race, color, and economic background, they're hoping and thinking that they may have a shot at getting in the industry.
Well, I absolutely pray that their hopes are proper and justified. The problem is, you know, down here in Southern California right now, where I happen to be this week, you know, in Los Angeles, it doesn't look like the city council is going to do much to make it possible even to get permits issued by the state, by the city, that will be necessary for someone to get state licensure. So now all of these pre-ICO dispensaries and other people acting down here are really at risk, and I think they're also going to be at risk at after AUMA.
I think that's crap. I think those pre-ICOs are going to get licenses in the state without a single problem. I sued LA in 2010 and got an injunction against them. I know all about LA, okay? LA is going to be fine. They're going to be fine down there, and people, you know, that industry is thriving down there, and they're not going to, you know, they're not going to lose that. They're not. It's just silly to think that. But, you know, and the truth is, George, of the 50,000 estimated cultivators in the state, how many are minorities? What percentage are minorities? You know?
I don't know.
All right.
I would think that it's not
an infinitesimal fraction. How about we open up, how about this law, this law, look at me now, I'm like getting all excited about this. What about if this law actually gives minority communities an opportunity to be at the ground floor of a brand new industry?
I hope so. I mean, there's nothing in either of those pieces of legislation that give us an idea if that will happen. But hopefully.
That's not true, because they're not going to set high license fees. They're not going to do in Illinois $25,000 to file an application. They're not going to do that here. They're not going to have. They're going to have license fees on par with ABC licenses. For if you have a bar out in Barstow, you know, it's a few grand to get a liquor license. You know.
I think my take on it, and sitting in my crystal ball, is that it won't really be at the state level that we'll have the limitations on who can get licensed, and it'll probably be, as long as you're not disqualified, it's okay, as long as you're okay under the local provisions. But the local provisions are either going to be bans, they're going to be restrictive as far as zoning. Some of them might even be numerical with the beauty contests that we don't like so much because of the chance of corruption. But you know, all those things are going to be based on, you know, what a local government does. So yes, if local governments are looking at the minority communities and seeing this as an opportunity for some economic benefit to them, hopefully that's the case. But I just don't see it.
All right. Well, I'll tell you this: without it, there's nothing. Without it, there's nothing.
Well,
I have a random question I want to throw in there. The taxational issue is coming up huge, and I mean, we get taxed up the ass in multiple ways as it's coming. One of the things that's built into AUMA, apparently, if you want to stay medical, it's going to protect you, and somehow you're not going to have to pay the sales tax of like 7.5%. How many businesses, if they're going to basically say, I'm growing for medical purpose because my taxes are lower than recreational, what is the benefit of going a recreational route then versus a straight up medical route, just from like a bookkeeping standpoint as a businessman?
You're gonna, look at Colorado. You have a huge number of a huge percentage of the market there is medical. Way more than, when you look at, say, and this is gonna, people are gonna hate me when I say this, but when you look at what sort of quote unquote real medical need is, and I hate to use that word because I don't like the medical recreation distinction at all, but when I've seen studies about people, let's just say cancers, AIDS, Crohn's disease, multiple sclerosis, nervous system disorders, and even add in pain relief, chronic pain relief, you're still talking about a relatively low number, somewhere in the range of 5 to 15%, okay, of all users of cannabis are using it for those purposes. Most, but I don't like to use the word recreational, it's just, and I don't like to use the word medical, I use, sometimes I use cannabis because I can't sleep at night. Sometimes I use cannabis because I need to be more creative in my thinking. I have a mental block, or I'm stressed out about something, so I need to relax. It's like there's a whole range of uses, and I'm just saying it's all going to be out there for us. It's all going to be out there. However the government wants to classify it. It's all going to be out there, and I'm not going to have to worry about getting arrested anymore. I like that a lot. I like that.
Well, think of it this way. When I wake up, my back is always killing me, so I smoke just to get through that. But by the time the evening hits, my back is okay just because I've been up, about, walking around, and the cannabis earlier is working on it. I want to have a good time with my friends. I'm hanging out. Now I'm using it for recreational purposes. But in the way these people are going to define it for us, if I'm going to save money by claiming from the cultivation side to the manufacturing to even the distribution point that I'm growing for medical purposes, even though in reality I'm actually doing all of this stuff for predominantly recreational, let's say I was going to just simply get paid more money for that, where does it balance out at the end of the day? Like, I think honestly it's determined at the point of consumption when you're consuming it. Morning for me, for example, is medical. Evening for me is basically recreational. So how does the person say I'm growing all of this weed for medical purposes when they don't really know which route it's going? Is it because of the scale tracking mechanism? You have to define it there?
Here's what's going to happen. If they overtax it, they're going to drive it into the black market anyway. Okay? So, or if they overtax the recreational, they're going to drive people to go and continue to have a thriving medical industry in the state that issues recommendations, and patients will be able to get a lower tax product, a quote-unquote medical product. Okay, that's what's going to happen. And at some point, the state will wake up and they'll go in and they'll try to fix the taxes. If you overtax something like that, it's going to send it into the black market. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, the other thing that's different from my approach to AUMA is in AUMA there's no limitation on local governments adding a production level tax on cultivation or manufacturing or on sales. And in mine, I added a local tax, but its real purpose was to put a cap on it. 5% at the most in retail sales and $2 per square foot canopy. The problem is there are many jurisdictions that will add another 5, 10, 15% on top of that, and then that's when Matt's concern about it driving into the black market would probably be a reality.
Yeah.
Right. As far as, I mean, when we started out, there was basically cops, drug dealers, and drug addicts. Is how society kind of just lumped us into this weird little triangle. Now we have such specialization down the line that we go. For example, the manufacturing community, it doesn't sound like AUMA is very friendly to them as it stands, because technically if you still get busted, it's a felony. I didn't see much reduction for people that, for example, are doing what's eventually going to be an M1 or an M2 type of license, manufacturing without hydrocarbons and manufacturing with hydrocarbon extraction. So where are they going to fall at the end of the spectrum? I mean, they're even talking about basically allowing it to be illegal to vaporize in public, and their definition of public spaces is just everything. Like everything that's not designated as a smoking space is basically a public space that they're saying you can't smoke unless it's inside the
Guys,
home.
why do we think we're going to get everything we want all at once? Why do we think
No,
that?
but I'm greedy. I'm greedy.
No, well, when I was 20, I was greedy too. And I went down to Mississippi, and I was I was going to be a revolutionary. I was going to start the revolution in Mississippi with black pulpwood haulers. Okay, look, it's gonna be a process, and that's the reality of it. And I don't necessarily like it, but that's the way it's gonna be.
My concern is, here's where we have a little difference there. There were things that the drafters did in the AUMA thing that they should have just shut up about. It's not a matter of we want everything we want. They added things in there that would have been better just not to add.
So what, George? What are you gonna do about it, George? There's nothing we can do now.
Exactly. At this point, I understand what you're saying, but let me just go back to what Ryan was just saying. As far as vaporization, last year Senator Leno tried to get a bill out there that would have equated vaporization of anything, tobacco, nicotine, or anything, to cigarettes, and that was defeated. This thing jumps out there and says vaporization is the same as tobacco. Why? It also has in here that it's illegal to smoke anywhere except in a private residence within 1,000 feet of a school. So at your own work, when you're saying you want to be creative, you couldn't use a vaporizer or cigarettes, even in your own workspace.
I don't disagree with you, George. It's just. Do you pull left, yes, or do you pull, or left, yes, and right, no, or it's like, I don't know, and it's like, I know I'm not going to go in and vote against this thing if it's the only one on the ballot. If yours gets on the ballot, if you can get a billionaire to back you, I'll be right behind you.
One of the things on mine, because I was going to go ahead and refile, and there's just not time though. But I made a mistake, and I needed to sort of confess to everybody here. There's a provision in my initiative that says that no person shall be licensed or have a license renewed unless they can show continuous California residency from and after January 1st of 2015. The problem with that is the Parker Initiative defined person as corporation, LLC, all the other kind of business entities, and the real reading of that unequivocally is any entity that wasn't in existence in 2014 or earlier can't get licensed until 2020. And it's a mistake, it's a drafting error, just like what the league says about what was in AB 266, but it's there. And I'm not sure we can change that with a cleanup legislation or not.
You going to be up to yours on the ballot? You have funding?
No, I'm just saying at this stage, no. But there are sort of poor provisions in there. Here's the thing. I believe, yes, with mine I could get funding to put it on the ballot. There's three things I had to sort of do the calculus on. Number one, can we get enough money to do it on the ballot? Thank God this year is a lower threshold than any time in recent history because of so few people showing up in the 2014 election. The second thing is you have to be able to mount a campaign with money in a very crowded presidential year with a lot of other initiatives to get more than 50% of the voters who vote to vote yes on yours. But because of this supremacy clause provision on the last page of AUMA, it says if any other initiative also passes on the ballot about legalization, if it doesn't get at least one vote more of yes than AUMA, it's null and void. So I don't want to waste everybody's time and money and everything like that. Even if we were lucky enough to get qualified, lucky enough to get 50%, I really don't know that fighting against such a well-financed campaign that we would be able to get more than that. So that's a long-winded answer is no, we don't have funding, and I wouldn't actually encourage that. The question I think everybody has to look at is, are we better off waiting for a better initiative in a subsequent year? And that's,
how does that look like? How does that look like? Talk to me about that.
I don't know. I mean, basically what it comes down to is we were saying that every year more and more Americans, and including Californians, look at cannabis as more innocuous or that it shouldn't be necessarily such a big criminal issue. And it's gone up and up every year. The hope would be that as now it's 60%, maybe it'll be 65% in a couple of years, maybe 70 after that, that these decisions that were made by the drafters of AUMA to be that conservative, be certain to get the votes of the Orange County conservatives and the women, maybe it wouldn't be necessary to be so restrictive in a future year. Now, I understand the flip side of that is there are provisions in the amendment section for AUMA that would allow the legislature to introduce penalties. It's just my personal take on it is it's taken so damn long for the legislature to ever address this. that I think they blew their wad this last year with the 3 new statutes. I don't know that we'll really be able to get much of a reduction for quite
They
some
sure
time.
moved fast to get that March 1 deadline moved, though.
What is that?
They sure moved quickly to get.
They did, and that was urgency legislation, and it almost was completely unopposed. And then hopefully we have some other cleanup legislation coming up for some of the problems with the gun amendment that came out of the
George,
horse.
you and I mean, there's 2 things. One is I'm not going to bother with the cannabis community on this initiative. They can vote however they want, and it doesn't matter how they vote. Okay.
Well, I understand. The numbers, I think, if everybody wants to know, are that between 9 and 11% of Californians regularly consume cannabis.
Right.
The rest,
and that group is, they may end up voting the way the rest of the state votes, 60% for, 40% against. They're not going to be relevant. Okay. Who's going to be relevant are the mainstream older voters who vote disproportionately, over 40, over 50 in that range and up. They vote way more than the youth. You're going to have, you're going to have a lackluster Hillary Clinton as the Democratic candidate, whose people will, not be very excited about. You're going to have a lot of people wanting to come out and vote for Donald Trump, which will be interesting.
yeah, going back to when we did the Emerald Cup, and you were the moderator for that. It was sort of a bittersweet moment for me, and I'm sure for Dave Hodges as well. Being called out and recognizing that there probably was not a credible path to get funding, or at least enough funding to get more than the Parker Initiative. That what I did though say from that dais up there that I agree with now, and I think we need to speak to especially to Normal and the local chapters, is that really, while you're saying that you don't care what the cannabis community does because it doesn't matter that much, at the same time, I don't think that AUMA campaign needs to care about us that much. It's not like they're going to, if you and I go out and throw fundraisers and raise a couple $100,000, it's not going to make a difference. If we go out and get our groups together to canvass voters, it's not going to make that much of a difference. What we have to do, given that the local governments were given the right to ban, is keep up efforts like Monterey.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, and so that, I guess the long-winded answer to that is I think we probably will not oppose this, but understand that if we don't do a lot of work with our locals, that much of this state will be balkanized. I'm also concerned, I tried to put provisions in there, and in the original filing it was more liberal, and then it was changed again, to not allow local governments to have control over packaging and things of that nature, because it makes it very difficult for our product company clients to do a statewide rollout when they have different requirements, for opaque packaging, for different things.
Sure. Balkanization is terrible. But you should see the event. We did a big event in LA. We invited elected officials. We're doing events in Orange County, Riverside County, San Bernardino. We're inviting elected officials, and we have tax policy people were flying in. We've got Paul Gallegos was there, former DA of Humboldt County, talking from a law enforcement perspective. We have all these doctors, Michael Backus, a researcher. We're talking to these local elected officials because we understand that there's going to be a post-AUMA world. There's going to be a post-MMRSA world, and it's going to be a world of where locals have a lot of power. So it doesn't really change my organizing strategy, and reaching across the table and continuing to find people in these communities, and then activating the minority communities so that these pastors and these churches in LA and South and LA and Central LA can get off it a little bit and start to go, maybe this isn't the worst thing, and maybe these kids in my church who couldn't get an education, maybe they're better off going in the cannabis business. Maybe they should do that. And that's really what I think we've got to be focusing on, And when it comes down to it, George, people are going to ask you in September, October, and just before the election this year, George, what do I do? I know you're a cannabis attorney. I know should I vote for this or not? You're going to get friends and relatives and colleagues asking you that. And I think you got to come up with an answer for them. We all have to come up with an answer for them.
Yeah, I think that's thank you to Normal so much for letting us have this discussion just amongst ourselves, and I hope everybody listening can understand that there are reservations on both of our parts, and it comes down to we wish it could have been done better. And sitting in those rooms sort of the last 2 weeks before the AUMA or Parker Initiative was filed, it became clear that most of the people writing it and involved in the policy were not cannabis people.
Right.
They were very excellent, political folks, but they were just looking at it as a campaign, and there really wasn't much of a policy, vision behind it. And I think that was what was also very disappointing.
George, in the end days, how did they actually come up with a lot of the decisions that they made about the limits, lack of pulling things back? I mean, was it like just straight up a marketing polling decision that they did?
Right.
I was told.
Right. I asked Ryan to limit me to an hour because I drove 6.5 hours today, and I'm toast right now. I'd like to sign off. I really, if you don't mind, I really appreciate
Well, we can do it like you said. We can do a three-part of this thing and actually go through it. But there's so much to get into on this.
You have to do it without me. I'm
no. Like we can call it. It's been a long night, and this is already a great segment. So we'll pick up pretty much at this point next time we meet up, and we'll do it a little bit earlier so you guys can get some sleep. Okay?
I'd be thrilled if you'd want to invite us back for a part 2.
Are you kidding? I'm locking you in for our legal team. You guys are killing it right now. This is like one of the best conversations I've ever heard about these subjects. So yeah, get some sleep, relax. We're going to pick up where we left off probably, I don't know, maybe next week. We'll see how it plans out. And
happy to come back. I just need a little bit of rest tonight.
Oh, no doubt. You've been driving for like 8 hours, so like, trust me, the driving kills me in this industry, so I get it. All right, guys. You did a great job.
Thanks for doing a great job. Thanks, George. I love you, George. You know that.
You Matt. Take care.
All right, okay.
All right, good night. All right, George, you too. I'll see you.
Okay, night, Ryan. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Hi, George.